So, what we have today, by the combination of these three ideas, is a condition the world has never been in before. And what this is challenging is particularly the institutions of governance. As you can see, if I want everyone to feel that it's fair and they have information privately that they can get themselves through the internet of what's going on, I can't just tell them that, no, you haven't got the truth. I tell you this is what is going on and you must trust us. You will make up your minds whether I can be trusted, or the person from government, or the person from the corporate sector who's talking to you can be trusted or not. How shall one govern in this world? Now, in this storm, which is being created by these three forces, each of them gathering strength and all coming together now, in this storm, two voices are being heard very clearly across the world. One is the voice which I tapped into this morning, is it fair? Is what going on, is it fair? And this is not just India, this is whether in the United States or in the Middle East, China even. People are beginning to wake up and shake up and say, I don't think the present system is entirely fair. The second voice that is being heard very loudly is the voice of the earth itself, which is saying, you can't carry on the way you are. I don't have any more resource for you. Now, I'm a physicist, as was mentioned, and the conservation in energy and materials is a fundamental law. You can convert material to energy and back forth, but that combination is finite. And so we have an earth whose material resources, as converted to energy, we are taking coal and petroleum and gas. And it has got material in it, but iron ore and so on. And we're using this limited resource for creating all the stuff that we are using and consuming. And we want more of that stuff because that is a good life. Projections show that if every person in India and China were to have the good lifestyle of persons in the United States, which we are being advertised and told it is a good lifestyle, and I aspire to it, the way I'm dressed and the shoes I wear, the gadgets that I have and the car I drive. But if everyone in the world, and especially China and India with its 2.5 billion people between them, were to live the life of an average, and I'm not talking the richest, average American, that's the goal, then we will need 5 Earths to support humanity. But we have only one. So the Earth is saying to us, enough is enough. You've got to change your idea about what you want to have, and then the way of getting it also. Because in the natural resources, equity becomes a very important issue. It's the one Earth for everybody. And they must have equal access to the water, for example, necessary for life, and the air to breathe too. So these are the central issues that are challenging institutions today. To have a more fair system and to have a more sustainable system. And we'll have to change our ideas about the goals of institutions, including private sector companies and governments, and the way we are going about achieving our goals, that we will create more fairness rather than less fairness, and more sustainability rather than less in the world. The institutions are required to bring us together, to make us feel that we are all participating in shaping the goals of these institutions and in their governance, and that we can judge very fairly with free access to information whether these institutions are serving our needs or not. Within corporations, the idea of corporate social responsibility is struggling to make a change from being the giving of some money at the end of the year or otherwise into some philanthropy. It's a percentage of your savings profits that the owners would put aside to do that. But the question being asked by people is that in the making of that profit, the processes that you used, the extraction that they had on society and in the earth, the harm therefore they might have caused, is what needs to be managed. So it's like the example of saying, well, I lead for 6 days a week a good, successful life. And on the 7th day, I go to the temple and say, well, here's my offering. And the more I lead a successful life, the larger is the offering I can give. But if the way I've been gathering my money is what is causing the harm to people and the society, then the size of my offering is not going to change the picture. And well, I personally said this, and Sunil knows and supported me, I think, to say that this idea about 2% CSR is such a narrow idea, because it's 2% of your profits, which if you're a very smart manager, maybe 10% of your revenues possibly. You're talking of 0.2% of the activity of the company. It's the activity of the company that can do good or cause harm. So it's the 100% that one should be concerned about, and not the 0.2% in what that is used for. So what is the purpose of the corporation then? Is it just to make money and then give some money away afterwards? Some to the shareholders and some to some philanthropy? Or is the purpose of the corporation to help create a better world for everybody? So it's questioning the purpose of the institution, and then you design the governance and the institution accordingly. National governments are severely challenged. Why so? Because national governments are sitting in the middle of the sandwich. On the top, we have corporations which are floating now across national boundaries, whereas Thomas Friedman said, the earth is flat. Why? Because he said, you can sit in Bangalore and you can see the brand of Sony on the golf course. So brands are everywhere, information is everywhere, capital can move everywhere, irrespective of national boundaries. So it's floating across national boundaries. What we have inside countries are groups who within the national boundaries are challenging the government to say, what about my identity? What about my inclusion? In our country, whether it's Jammu and Kashmir, or in the northeast, or the tribal groups in the middle of India, asking this question. What about my rights? Am I sufficiently included in the governance of our country or not? So here in the middle we have the government elected by these people, accountable somehow to the global corporations or to corporations, who say, unless you make it easy for me, I will not come, I'll go somewhere else. And making it easy for me is, please don't tax me, please have no laws for me. Whereas the government has to have tax to look after the needs of people who cannot afford yet to have an education with their own money, or provide health to them, provide infrastructure for them in their villages. So government needs the taxes to deliver what the people need the government to do. And similarly, when you talk about rights, the rights to having the water body next to my village, the rights to be safe in my workplace, in other words, some factory regulations, the governments have to have regulations for these. So if capital says, no, you've got too many regulations and the tax is too high, and governments were to give up regulating and having taxes, these people at the bottom that I mentioned to you, who have elected the government, are going to say, you're not the government for us, you're the government for them. And you can sense this going on even in our country. It's certainly going on a lot in the United States, beginning to happen in China now. In Europe, it's a dance between both. The idea that government and life and the planet is for the people, and not just for money. So, at the international level, what's happening? We talk about global climate change. It's a common resource. It belongs to everybody. The 1 billion people of India have as much right to air and water as the people in the United States, the 300 odd million of them. And we want to now create a system which is fair to everybody, equally, every human being, whether they are in a rich country or a poor country, or they have more money or less money. And to make rules of global climate change governance are getting stuck on precisely this issue. But should we be saying, are we consuming more of the Earth's resources per capita or as a nation? Now, if you're 1.2 billion people, even if each of us consumes next to nothing, it can add up to more than what Singapore might consume at 300 million, or even the United States sometime as we grow. So that's not fair though. Every human being, to the point I made, is a beating heart, is a one body, has as much need for water and air as any other body has. So in global climate change, this governance problem is becoming very acute. In global trade, similarly, the institutions of global governance which are fair to the people of all the countries, we do not have today. So at all three levels, institutional reform is becoming very necessary, going back almost to fundamental principles of how decisions are to be taken, in whose interests and by whom are decisions to be taken. So now I've laid out before you, in perhaps rather abstract and intellectual terms, the situation of the world. What shall we do in India to shape the future that we want, and which you said should be a future in which all of us will do something about it, each of us, by working hard, by leading well, by supporting others. What will we each of us do to help create the world, to make the world that we all strive to have? Leadership has two functions. One is to give direction, and the other is to get people together, to work together as a team. Just two. I want to simplify it. We expect our leaders to have some foresight and to give direction, and so you lead in showing us the way. But in a world in which we don't know what may happen, because things are changing so fast, leaders do find it difficult to make any predictions of what the world might be. Especially when the people themselves have so much of a voice that they could change all that very soon by revolt, revolution, innovation, positive innovations, a change. How do you then, as a leader, along with people, give a sense of direction? Systems thinking, that is, considering many different types of things, which by their interaction shape the world and the future. Systems thinking has become a lost art. We are taught in our disciplines to be the masters of some part, some discipline in management, some discipline of engineering, some discipline within the social sciences. But if you are a child, you don't know these disciplines, you just take things as they are and you make strange connections. And we as parents say, ye uski jagah nahi hai, ye uska time nahi hai. But the child is seeing a connection between this and that. And that's what we got to come down to, is begin to see connections between things and the possibilities that arise by making better connections between things. I gather that, as I'm jumping ahead, that in these 5 days you're going to be doing some interesting exercises tonight or tomorrow night with some straws to create racing cars, yes, which is then going to help the Hero Motorcorp to produce the world's lightest, most environmentally friendly racing machines. But you're going to see, it's about systems thinking. These are little odd things, which different new ways can I connect them together to produce an outcome that I want. So leaders need to have the ability to think of a system, to see many things and the possibilities of the connections amongst these things. The second is the ability to get people together. Now, the need for a leader to give direction and the need for a leader to get people together has been there for thousands of years. If you look back into our own mythology and you look at what leaders did, this is what they did. They got a whole nation together, an army together. Alexander did that and gave a direction, we should go to India. But the context in which you have to perform these functions has changed. Like I mentioned, the context in which you got to give direction is a very different context with so many things swirling around, which was not so in a much more stable world, a simple world long back. So a new skill that you need, an orientation of systems thinking to perform your leadership function, of being able to give, sensing first for yourself and then give direction. The second, getting together. In a world where one respected that the person is the monarch and we have to do what the monarch says or else. So that's the way it's supposed to be, right? It's easy to get people together, easier, because you can tell them to get together, and if they don't, you can get rid of the person who's an obstruction. Were you in the army? No. We went to a school, both of us are not schools now, an army-run school. And there one had this, Sunil's familiar with the school too, the tradition, that the prefect or the teacher, if people were not cooperating, you told somebody that you shall be put out in the line because you're not with the rest. And so you could force people to come together. But in a democratic world where people have the choice to come with you, to cooperate with others, and they may not, you cannot use that method of top-down authority as much as one is used to encourage people to work together. People must want to work with each other. Free agents to cooperate together, because they recognize then that by working together, we will create the outcome that we all want. The skill of evoking in people the shared aspiration, and then they having the skills and teaching them the skills perhaps of working with others is a core leadership ability that we need to develop. And I might say that India needs this ability more than any other country does. We are the most diverse, argumentative country in the world. Now again, V.S. Naipaul wrote a book before you all were born, but the faculty might remember this. He wrote a book called India, A Million Mutinies Now in 1991 when we had our reforms, where V.S. Naipaul, the Nobel laureate, he's of Indian origin, Nobel laureate in literature, said that India is now getting energy with the reforms in 91. Million mutinies, innovations now. Today, if V.S. Naipaul were to write a book about India, he would probably call it India, A Million Bottlenecks Now. All over. Projects are stuck, policies are stuck, because there's some contention between people. And for good reason. I mean, the environment does need to be protected, land rights must be secured, jobs also must be there, industry must grow. So they're all good things. But to work out together how we're going to get all these good things and carry on and progress is not happening in our country fast enough. Which is why we have so far not progressed as fast towards the aspirations that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru laid out in 1947, because we are yet not able to work effectively together. I want to offer to you 4 models of leadership and governance. And these models came out through conversation, dialogues between some hundreds of Indians starting in 1999, 2000. And these models came out then. And then later, a few years later, 5 years later, when Sunil was president of CII, then World Economic Forum, we got together. And we, in a leadership conclave in Jaipur, we threw these ideas in again and got a great reinforcement. India needs new types of leaders and a new form of governance. So what were these old 4 models that came out? One was, they're pictures. I'm going to give it to you as pictures. I'm sure you can imagine the pictures. Here's a picture of a peacock strutting around with very fine feathers and so on, and little sparrows, a little frightened of the peacock and on the fringes. In between there's some pigeons, birds scrambling around. This picture was made by that group of persons, which included school children, university children, economists and leaders of political parties and business leaders, as a depiction of what India was becoming in the 1990s, more of, and it was a good thing. But the type of leaders that we were respecting then, beginning to respect. And they said that the peacock is a person who has a lot of wealth, a lot of good big things the person enjoys. And so you put the peacock's picture, that's on the covers of magazines, and talk about who has the most. These were new languages that were coming into our country. Comparing people by their wealth, by how much they have, and so on. And it's not a bad thing, as I say. We should aspire to have more. But the effect on the condition of society was what they're pointing out, that the reforms had been made to provide more opportunity for the sparrows to get the grain, more opportunities for them. But when you throw open a system for more opportunities, the people who already have the means to take advantage of the opportunity will first grow. I mean, those who already have some capital can use the capital to grow more, because the opportunity is there now in the market to do that. The people who already have education will be able to capitalize on that fact and will be admired and will get more positions. And similarly, you can see the people who have access to the political configuration can then, in an open situation, use that and to grow. Now, this is a very fundamental law of economics called cumulative causation. Yes. Dr. Panda, I'm not an economist, but I'm not wrong here, right? Cumulative causation, it's a physics law also. If you have something which is required to grow further, those who have more of it is going to grow further. So we have this situation which says that there will be sort of Kuznets curve, that those who have will grow further, and then there will be a trickle down. So one is hoping that the sparrows, the trickle down of opportunity to them will happen much faster than it has so far. The point was about leadership, and this young woman who drew these four pictures for us said that, you know, we never used to consider rich people as leaders in society in India till then, and we do now. It's a good thing. So we got one model of leaders here. Wealth gives you the ability to lead, to be seen as a leader. The second model was a tiger in the jungle and some wolves, and again some small squirrels trying to hide up the trees. What was this? It says a person who has strength, a gun, is a leader. And we do call Mao a leader. Our springs from the barrel of a gun. And in our country, such people are also seen as leaders and called leaders, netas. I'm sad to say even more so now than used to be. And so this is a model of leadership, where leadership comes from your ability to force, by violence even, your views on others. It's a way of leading. It's a type of leader. The third model, which was a very interesting one for us, came out in a picture of buffaloes wallowing in a pond. On the side of this pond, this girl had drawn a little child sitting, and she said it's a very hot summer day in northern India. They want to be cool in the middle of the day. Ye bechara bachcha bahar baitha hai, he needs the water too. And it's a metaphor here. Our children are waiting for better nutrition and better education. The buffaloes inside Chisar are netas. They all like the cabinet and the big secretaries and so. We say, our economists, that these people, we call them netas and leaders. We put them into those positions to find a solution for us all. When one buffalo says, I got the idea, the other buffalo or the other one says, no, so this buffalo tries and then settles down. Then the other buffalo says, well, I got the idea. The first said, when I got the idea, you didn't cooperate. So ये हो रहा है, सब buffaloes पॉन्टी में हैं, हम सब बैठे हैं, बातें, जरा lead. Point again, she said, we call these people who are given positions as leaders. If I am member planning commission, then I'm automatically a leader, as it were. Or minister so and so bonita hai. So we got three models of leaders, and they are not adequate for what we need today. So, no hope, huh? No. But there was a fourth model that was emerging as we looked around our own country and looked around the world too. That there are leaders come in other forms and they exercise leadership in other ways. And this was a picture of fireflies, jugnuns, arising. These are little things. They have their own light. They're not given the light by their position. They're not given the light because they have the wealth. They're not given the light because they've given a gun. There's an urge in them to be something, to do something. And when many little fireflies all arise together, then the darkness turns to light. The model of leadership for India must have many more fireflies. The other three models are not the appropriate models by themselves to produce the country that we want. Fireflies. Who is a firefly? And I'll startle you by saying Mahatma Gandhi has been the greatest example of a firefly in the world. As I mentioned to you, a firefly does not get its leadership ability or right from the money that he or she has. Mahatma Gandhi didn't have money to give people and saying, I'm giving this to you so that you will do what I want you to do. Mahatma Gandhi never used a gun like Mao did to compel people to follow. And he had done that to support himself. not to hit anybody, and yet people follow. Mahatma Gandhi wasn't the president or the prime minister or anything, but yet millions followed. You know that statue that you see in the Sardar Patel March, the Dandi March, and we'll be soon coming to the commemoration of that, the Dandi March on the 2nd of October, when he set out. There he was, but why did people follow? He had a light. He was caring for the freedom of everybody, and he was taking the first steps himself, even though it was dangerous to him, but he took them. So my definition of a leader, and I urge this for you to please think about, is a leader is she or he who takes the first steps. If someone else has taken the steps and you're following behind, you're a good follower, and that's good, but you're not a leader. Takes the first steps towards that which she or he most deeply cares about. So your light to lead, your energy to lead comes from the caring for something beyond yourself that you care to produce in the world. Takes the first steps towards that which he or he deeply cares about, and in ways that others then wish to follow. So without a follower, you're not a leader. Why would others wish to follow you if what you cared about was not what they also cared about? And so for you to listen to others what they care about is the beginning of leadership. Not just saying what you care about, but then you can be saying, someone else is saying, we can all be buffaloes around here in the pond. Just ask your neighbor, what do you really care to achieve in your life? I hope that, I know that in these 5 days, you would be very impressed with the innovation that you have made in the induction program. I hope that there would be yourselves, you could do it not as part of the formal program, perhaps yourself. Just this today and maybe tomorrow morning, just sit down quietly, just by yourself, and write on a piece of paper, what is the world that I really care to have and that I will do something about? What do I care about? What do you care about the most? It could be, I care to have a better life for my older parents. And then you describe what sort of life would you imagine them living, what sort of community and facilities would they have? Who do you care about, and what would you care for them to have? Write that. Then if you can, just talk to someone else around you and ask, what do you care about? And let me then share what I care about, and make it a conversation. And with that, if I can say, you might get 4 or 5 projects emerging from this school in the next few days or few weeks, which are a collation of teams who have chosen to work together because what they care about is the same type of thing. Then, how do we make this happen? It's not that you're the first who would be thinking about it, others have too. Who are the others who have tried to do this, who are succeeding? And then your inquiry starts. And that makes you the best learner. In pedagogy, as I said, I'm not the expert, but I've tested it with one dean at least, and I want you to agree. It's been found that if you have something that you're really caring about and passionately wanting to learn more about, you are the best learner. You will learn a variety of disciplines because you are looking for an answer to a question which can't be easily boxed yet. It's not going to come out that 5 years I've been taught something, or 3 years, or 2 years, and then I'm suddenly going to find the answer to my question. You start with, like someone said, what's the question? The question to which, in my life, I'm going to find an answer. And like Mahatma Gandhi said, it's by doing that you test your knowledge and your answer. This is a test now, and people can speak. What is the title of Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography? So many. You really have taken the best people here. My experiments with truth. Well said. His whole life, as he said, is his experiments with different ways of realizing the truth and making the world live in truth. That was him. Everything. He was a great experimenter in nutrition and a great experimenter in doing things with social movement design. In the last, I want to have some time for questions, and we'll have half an hour. I want to leave one question, because you are the engineering school, to you. And since Sunil is here, and I know his connection with building the institution in Mohali also. Sunil, here's the question from Mahatma Gandhi. He recognized that our livelihoods through industry, which were all in the textile business mostly in India, food processing and textiles. I'm talking about the 1900s, early years, and the 1800s. That our industry was destroyed. Textiles certainly was destroyed. That some mills in Lancaster had produced technologies, and we could not compete, our people could not compete with them. So Mahatma Gandhi was in England, and he used to go, and he was curious, like I said, in question. So he goes for a political conference, but he said, I want to go and see the mills in Manchester, Lancaster. So he's taken there. There's Mahatma Ji in his movie. Have you seen his picture? Though he was in England, he would be in his dhoti and his chappals, shawl because it's cold. And he's walking around this mill with this Englishman, the manager. And it's dirty and noisy, as those mills were, with slushy and steam all over the place, grease all over the place. So he asked him, he says, why are all these machines in one place? Because Mahatma Gandhi's idea was that people should be able to produce in a dispersed fashion. You can have an enterprise here, an enterprise there, village enterprise here, village enterprise there. Why have you crammed all these things into one factory? So the man thought about it. He said, you see, when this technology came of having a mechanical spinning and weaving processes, the machines were powered by steam. And steam cannot be transported over long distances. So near the boiler, we put all the machines. And so people had to come to the factory to work the machines. So Mahatma Ji said, but I noticed that there's electricity going on to all these machines. And as far as I know, electricity transports a long distance. So why do you still have all these machines in one place? The man thought about it. He says, it's a good question. Why couldn't you put these into more open spaces near people's homes? They could work, and women could also work, be near home and work. Why don't you think of this? No jawab from him. He came back and he asked Mr. G.D. Birla and J.R.D. Tata and some others, I have this question to you, he said. Maybe for England it doesn't matter, but I think for us, if we can innovate the form of the enterprise, the technology is now available, electricity, it would really help to create the sort of inclusive country with jobs created in many places that we need to have, and less labor unrest too. Well, this was in 1940s that he asked the question, and I'm saying it's now 2070 years later. Gently, the answers are emerging. Gently. The problem that came in was not just the technology of sending the power and to have machines dispersed, was a control problem. Now, this is how testing. How many of you have seen Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times movie? You've got a bright set of people. In that movie he shows that there are this Charlie Chaplin in this big, you've seen that assembly line, that thing. And he's like a cog in the machine, And the boss is sitting in this control room with this TV monitor, watching what everyone's doing on the line. So, we want to control everything in the process, and the human being included, which is another reason why we put them into one place. If they were dispersed, how would I know what they're doing? Except, today, as I said, with dispersion of information availability and technology, one could even do that. One can have a manufacturing enterprise, which is a network of many enterprises, in which the ownership is also spread to the parts of the enterprise. And this type of enterprise is far more resilient than is a single large enterprise with everything under one roof. So, to the management students and to the engineering students, maybe you will research and find and develop models of creating a manufacturing institution. An institution, I don't mean one organization, it means a collection of many into an enterprise. That will be an answer not just for India, but also for the world. And in the design of this institution, the fairness hopefully will come by thinking of a different form of ownership and participation in the production of this enterprise. People are not entirely employees of one owner. They own their parts of the enterprises also, the shareholders, but also environmental sustainability. And I would pose it as a thought to you that if you have a very large enterprise in one place, then you need large amounts of land and large amounts of water from one place. To get then many people to agree to give it to you, and their displacement is a problem. If you have many small ones, the community can make the adjustment itself with you. And that's where we come back to the corporations and its form, that you are a part of a community and the stakeholders' needs around you. You must have a means of understanding and building them into the governance of your enterprise. What have I said? Finally, it's about leadership. It's about leadership in recognizing that we need to achieve aspirational goals that we have not yet achieved, but should achieve. To achieve them, we need new forms of institutions. To create those new forms of institutions, we're going to have to be innovative. Innovation means I must care for something and know that I don't have the answer yet, and maybe no one has, but I'm going to learn, experiment, and create the answer that we need. I do hope that this university, and I expect it will, considering its heritage with Mr. Munjal and Sunil and the other brothers, this has the heritage. And I'm sure that it won't be for lack of support. I hope not. It is going to be, if you don't get the answer, it's really because you haven't worked it out yourself. So thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you. Time for some questions. Can I start with one question? Why are the girls sitting there? Huh? Why are you sitting there?
So you talked about democracy and its value spreading around the world, but just think about what happened in the Arab Spring. It doesn't always work, no sir?
Yeah.
What happened in Egypt, what happened in Iraq?
Very well said. Let me take a few questions and I will answer. Yes.
You said that one of the main things that you said will be a depleting the resources on Earth. My question is that how does it matter? While I'm alive, I keep depleting it. 3 generations, 4 generations later, I'm not going to be around. So why does it matter whether I'm depleting this or not?
Yeah.
About energy conservation, but the first law of dynamics, no energy is wasted. And you said that it will take 5 hours to make every Indian and Chinese to be as luxurious or as say like as the US. But the point that I think you are missing is that technology also advances. It's not like that humanity will stop advancing. We will have more technology to harness sun. And in the end, when we will reach maybe type 2 civilization, we will automatically harness our whole sun, our whole star. So in that, it doesn't matter if I have any resources or natural resources. In that, we don't need any oil or this stuff. It's like everyone tells us to conserve energy, but instead they should be like, if you need to survive, invent. So that's it.
Very good. Yes, I can.
So my question is, like as you stated that if we split up the production unit, place it in other locations, maybe that may decrease certain costs. So, but in economics, there's one thing called economies to scale, where a lot of costs are reduced because of localization or maybe doing production at larger unit at one location. So
very good. Thank you. Let me take these 4 questions.
Suppose there's a person who is developing a factory near a village. He needs to have a water body for the disposal of toxic and waste. So is it ethically approval for him to make the factory to increase the GDP, or should he find some alternate ways? Because either ways, by making a factory, he's benefiting the GDP of the country. But on the other hand, the lives of the village is at stake. So
okay. Total volume of activity in the economy of the US. It's total volume of activity. It doesn't matter what the activity is. So we, like people illustrate the sort of foolishness of the single measure, is that if you have an environmental disaster, like they've had in the United States, First the Exxon Valdez one in Alaska some 20 years ago, then the more recent one in BP. All the lawyers' fees to attend to the claims and to sue BP and all the cleanup requirements, which is not improving anything, all that adds up into the GDP. Okay, so in Jammu and Kashmir right now, if there's been a disaster and more things are being flown in aeroplanes and more stuff, that is all going to add up to the GDP, but there's no improvement caused by that to the human condition. So the GDP is just a measure of activity. It's just a measure of activity. Whether you want that activity or not is the other question. And that way comes back to what sort of activities do we want? Why do we want them? And how will we get them? So this, of course, economists all over the world are now realizing and saying that I think we need other measures to assess whether there's enough goodness in the world. And so new measures like well-being and social cohesion and happiness are being introduced. It's not easy to measure them, but it's necessary to measure them if that is what you want. So that's where economics is getting to now, is to start including things from other disciplines, things to do with emotions and society and caring, into those are things we want. How do we start measuring whether we have enough of them in our nations and in our societies? So it leads to the cooperation, as you said, that the corporations also, they measure themselves only by the economic measures, which is my revenue, profit, and my shareholder value, things which I can express in money terms, like GDP is. Then also I'm looking at a very narrow slice of the world. And I'm ignoring the other things that I as a corporation should feel responsible for, is the impact of my economic operations on the society and on the environment. So balanced scorecards are being introduced as an idea for corporations to govern themselves, which is a better idea of business responsibility than 2% CSR. Economies of scale. It's a good, and I learned this when I was in Tata Motors, Kotelko we used to call it, that here we are a very small company by world standards. We were producing 50,000 units of trucks. And you have General Motors producing 2 million and someone 1 million and someone so on. And the idea of scale, that if you produce more of something, then you learn to do it better, you do it more efficiently, you have of course much more resource. How would you compete against these persons to do that? And we said you've got to start where you are. We are small. Is there another way of looking at economies? And the idea of scope was being introduced then, we're talking of the 1970s, into management literature. Economies of scope, in which if you have a greater variety of things available in the enterprise, the combinations that can be produced are more than a monocultural scale enterprise can produce. And so more innovation comes out of having a variety, which is an economy of scope, than by insisting of having more of the same and scale through that. We in India have introduced the idea of ultra mega power plants. And they were on the thesis of economy of scale, that have one very big thing or several very big things. The unit cost of power will be very low because you're producing using the capital equipment over many more units. But if you take the time cost of money and other factors, to acquire the land for that, to get the water rights done for that, takes you that long. Meanwhile, the money is stuck. It's what's happened to our projects. The money is stuck, and so you've got the NPAs also in the banks. Also, you must be able to use it consistently. Economy of scale will come if it is continuously used. If I have a plant capable of producing 1 million, it's designed theoretically to have a low cost when it is producing 1 million, but it produces only 500,000, then I'm stuck. Yeah? I've got very high costs actually to do that. If my plant had the possibility of producing something else when there was not a demand for this particular type of product, then I'd be using my capital more fully. So the context between economies of scope, which is through adequate diversity rather than scale. Now to control scale, you have Charlie Chaplin's idea. Everyone does a simple operation, it's easy, industrial engineering. To manage scope, people have to collaborate with each other. And we found in Tata Motors that way, that we better work on economies of scope, and which requires collaboration between different disciplines in the enterprise. And so, turning that, we were able to devise a new way of creating a new product, which we did in the light commercial vehicle, something we'd never done before, producing only medium trucks, light commercial vehicle, new engine, new transmission, new body, new everything, which from the time of decision, I think we better do this, to the time it was being sold, and people were buying and getting serviced, was 18 months. The shortest time then in the world was the Japanese was about 3.5 to 4 years. The Germans were about 7 or 8 years. How did this happen? It was because the possibility of many things combining very fluidly, flexibly through the process enabled that to happen. So this was the economy of scope. And because we got the product so fast, we were able to prevent the competitors from taking over the market, which they would have if we had delayed another 2 or 3 years to do that. So you can see how the economy grew by having something small but with a variety in it. Technology also does advance. And I like your point about the sun. When I said material and energy in the earth, coal, petroleum, gas, shale, oil, all in the earth, the sun is one source of energy which is outside ourselves. So yes, let's start using much more of sun and less of other things. Less of other things. Even nuclear energy, by the way, is material from the earth converted into energy and so on. And then the disposal of, as you know, the bad energy that is material is another problem for the earth. So sun is, yes, a very interesting one. Perhaps wind is too, but sun is the most powerful one. Now, if you want to get more solar energy used rather than more gas energy used, and so just see what is happening in the world today. People will tell you that it's technologically too early, so we keep investing in the others, in more of the others, then you get the vested interest in all the infrastructure that suits the others, and so it may take 100, 200 years. If the collaboration between the people who have to give up something because they're vested in industries which we should not have more of, and to get more of industries we don't have much of, the management of the governance of this is the challenge. And so the problem of getting a sustainable model is not just technology. In fact, the technologies are probably dancing around. It's a problem of governance of the interests of people, including the people in industry, in the society. And when I mentioned about the global WTO and climate change, that's the problem. There are enough people today who are saying that this idea that I said that you might need to manage the earth is a necessary idea. They're saying, no, all the figures are wrong. You can get, there's so much information available. If you have a point of view, you'd be stupid if you can't get enough research reports to support your point of view. Just like your opponent, having the opposing point of view, will find enough research reports. And which is why Peter Drucker, a great management guru, used to say, I never ask a good executive to give me the facts. I ask him for his opinion first. Because I know he's going to be smart enough and have people around him to get the facts to suit his opinion. So what do you believe in? What do you care about? And look for the ideas and information to support you. So our challenge in getting to, I think, which is a great idea, is the solution in terms of who takes the decisions and the governance and the institutions. The third one I want to come to is the question of democracy. One person, one vote is not democracy. Democracy is, yes, it's of the people, it's for the people, it is by the people. And if you have a government which is formed by the votes of the people, you've got a government which is democratically elected. But that is not complete democracy. Then we say the democratic government is not for the people. They seem to look after themselves or some particular interests, and they're not looking after all of us as people. So we need to shift the concept of democracy from elections to accountability to the citizens. But that's not sufficient either. We want to have the right to create the world and to use our ideas also, so we need democracy by the people also. In our constitution in India, we had said this when we founded 47, didn't recognize it sufficiently because it was sort of philosophical language. So in 1993 and 94, we passed two amendments to the constitution, as the 73rd and 74th amendments to the constitution, saying local bodies in villages and in cities shall govern themselves. Is that what happens in our cities? No, and this is 20 years ago. So you see, changing institutions in which decision rights are going to be given to the people is not easy. The vested interests will not let that happen. With that, I want to talk about the situation in Arab Spring. But why don't I talk about the Aam Aadmi Party here? So, use social media, you can generate a lot. So here is an Aam Aadmi Party with Arun Kejriwal. Soon realized within a year, with Anna Hazare and others and all middle class and other citizens saying, these governments are not accountable to us, corruption, and we're going to form some new laws. But then how do you amongst yourself agree on what the new law is going to be, and you start falling apart already in that movement. Second, the political party therefore, what is the structure of this party and giving seats fairly, which is running a political party. So a movement is one sort of institution. A political party is another sort of institution, and very soon they found they were a government. Now a government is another sort of institution where you are given legit authority to take decisions, and you want to take them in consultation with the people, and you find you don't have the means to do it, so you call a darbar, and it breaks up because so many people arrive. And this is being missed, that merely getting people to speak up is going to give you democracy. It will not. We have to develop the systems of collaborative decision making and collaborating implementation. Then we really got democracy by the people, for the people, and of the people going. And so the India Backbone Implementation Network, which was mentioned as I'm involved with, we conceived this idea in the Planning Commission to say what India needs most of all, more than any other country, is the people's ability as stakeholders to work together, to agree together, to monitor together, to implement together. And this will have to be in many different areas and all over the country. This will have to be the skill. Is this a learnable skill? Yes, we found it's a learnable skill. There are some examples in India, many elsewhere in the world. Bring these skills, learn these skills, use these skills, and then we can make India what we wish it to be. In the case of the Arab Spring, just to conclude that one, yes, it broke down because the political configurations, we were opposing political configurations. So just merely because the people said what is presently going on is not good enough, you have to devise what is now required, the new institutions that are required. It's not done there. And thank goodness we are not like that, but we've got a challenge. We better start learning how to create these institutions of the people, by the people, and for the people. Lastly, the very good question from yourself about does it matter if you don't have resources? Well, I can start trying to calculate and physically, and I say we can go into all of that. In India, the Arthashastra, the first book anywhere about economic policy, written Italians. Ashoka took it, and he was a great master in applying it. Then Ashoka had a turn of heart. He felt that the rights of all living beings need to be respected. Not just people, then he went on to say that the rights of plants and rivers also need to be respected. It was an idea of compassion, of being part of something larger than yourself, something which is a living thing. It's larger than yourself, and you are a part of it. So does it matter? Is often a question not about in calculation, does it matter? Do I care for it? And does it matter? And that's the point. But I want to make it a physics and a science problem also. There are two fundamental theories of science, and I can see that these guys will pass with flying colors. One is the second law of thermodynamics, I guess you all know it, which says that the entropy, which is the uselessness of an energy in a system, will increase over time. Entropy, which is confusion, and the uselessness of energy will increase over time. It's inevitable, and every engineer better know that law. You can't run away from it. The second law is the law of evolutionary biology, which says in any complex system, actually new good things come out over time. It creates greater capabilities. So there's an engineering view that the capability of a complex system will deteriorate over time, and a biological view which says the capability of a complex system will improve over time. Now tell me which is right and which is wrong. The catch is here. The second law of thermodynamics is from an engineering perspective. Is I, as an engineer, design a system outside myself, that system is going to deteriorate in its capabilities to manage itself. I'll have to keep interceding in it. to restore the order in it, to get it to have capabilities in it. Whereas, in the biological view, even any designer is part of a system. We as human beings are part of nature. We do have an aspiration to shape society and nature to be better for everybody. But I must recognize that in the systems view, which is now catching on very strongly, there are feedback loops. But what I do is going to create a reaction on me also. And this is a pure mathematics systems description. It's nothing anymore to do with my caring also. I must recognize that I cannot be outside or larger than the system. I am a part of it. And so complex self-adaptive systems is the new metaphor for institutions, not the engineering metaphor of institution design. And since my whole thesis was about institutions, I'm bringing that back. Think of institutions as complex, because they must have many functions and many different aspirations in them. But they must be able to adapt. And because they are human institutions, there's a desire to make it self-adapt. I'm not outside that. I myself am influenced by what happens inside. And so if you wish to lead, you must listen to the reactions on those that you wish to lead. Because in a democracy certainly, but even in dictatorships, that part of the earth, that is the people, can throw you out also. So it's not just the earth will throw you out, but the people will also throw you out. So be humble and yet create the ideas which others will share with you, because you're including them, that we together are shaping the world that we want. We have just 5 more minutes, so I don't know what you want to do. Let's take 1 or 2 more questions, or carry on. Yes, please. In the middle there too, young man.
That's not quite possible and that's not good. So because first thing, if someone is willing to have education, he can have by today's policies, but that's not my answer. So my answer is, so it would lead to communism. So because if you give right to education to everyone, then they will have equal qualifications. And you know, sir, people are dramatically demanding. If they have equal education, they will demand equal jobs. And if that happens, there would be equal jobs, then equal concentration of wealth. And sir, if that happens, there would be no Ambanis, no Birlas, no Munjals.
Okay.
And sir, one more thing. And sir, if that happens, there would be no motivation in our country, because I know if I'm going to work hard, there will be no more money. So eventually, economy will collapse.
One more question.
Where there is a national disaster occurred. So there is a major setback to the economy as well as environment. Sir, central state governments are providing them safety and rescuing the peoples. So sir, although there are a number of activities going on, you said GDP is determined by the number of activities. Sir, but there is a major setback to the economy, not only of that region but also of the country. So in all that GDP increases of the country due to the number of activities, or goes down due to the economic and environmental loss.
And let me take it is. So the state domestic product goes up by those bad things. They are adding to the growth of the state domestic product and therefore India. In the time being, of course, other things are going down, other activities are not happening. And those are the good activities that one wanted to continue happening. So the point here is not the total GDP, is what is one including in that total number. I would like a situation where the bad things are a deduction from the GDP, not an addition to the GDP. So I'm talking of some other product, goodness product if you want to call it, where all these things of disaster and suing each other in courts, you can do those, but they should be subtracted from the GDP. The idea of green GDP goes in this fashion. It says all the natural resources that you use shall be a subtraction from the economic output that you produced. And so new notions of what are we measuring and how do we measure it are emerging, and I would urge that we look into this. This is the big discussion going on in the world of economics in these years, these last 4 or 5 years. The second one, which is a good one, he's asking is that if everyone has an equal education, they will all want to have the same jobs. And that's like communism. What do you mean by education? When you say equal qualification, this is where we start coming down to say that if it are going to certify that all persons must be engineers, because I only need engineers, and there's a certain standard for engineers, then I've got a situation, there is complete monochromy here, all engineers, and they'll all want the few engineering jobs. But if I introduce, and someone says by education, I want to learn how to be a good family therapist, then there may be those jobs too, or vocations. So there's a great variety of things that one can learn to be and to do. And it is not desirable, I'm saying, it's certainly not possible to predict what exactly are going to be the vocations that people will be engaging themselves in even 10 years from today, because of the uncertainty and the complexity and the change in the world. It's not possible. Therefore, to design a skilling operation like a scaling operation, that I'm going to determine the particular jobs and how many of them, and then set up like a supply line, the number of institutions to produce just those, that whole system is going to break down, as it has broken down in our own country. We did set up all these IITs with these are the things required and so many, but when the things change, no one wants to go to them. You don't get useful things to them. So we have to look at education as a much more experiential, dynamic exercise, a dynamic exercise. So the ability to learn is what must be. I was at the Global Economic Symposium, this time it was conducted in Kuala Lumpur. It's the last 4 years they've been having it in different places in the world. Germany is their home. And they have about 8 or 9 Nobel laureates every time. And fortunately, other discipline Nobel laureates are appearing also. And this time there were these 2 subjects which were central. One of them, 3. One, well, this business about GDP and economics, as economics missing something, and do we need to change it? All over the world is a problem of young people finding enough jobs, whether it's US or Spain or Greece or our country too. They're linked together. It's not just jobs, it's enterprises. You could be employing yourself and employing a few others too. So what are the vocations in which people will find opportunities for themselves? Then what sort of education should they be provided so that they will be equipped for those opportunities? And so one came to the conclusion, the whole group, including the Nobel laureates, that the way we are thinking about jobs and skills in education is a very mechanical idea of very certified standards and numbers, and try to make it like an assembly line. We have to change it on its head, and there must be much more interplay between the jobs and the people who are in the education and the people who are in the school. When in school, you're thinking about what you care about in life. With that question, you are searching. The school education should enable you to have modular access to varieties of things, which I believe in your university you are intending to introduce. That is what they came to as a conclusion. The architecture of the education enterprise and its curriculum has to be changed. In that, there will be Birlas and Ambanis, and absolutely, I'm saying they're good. But the other things must also happen in the world. The other things must also happen in the world. It cannot be at the exclusion of other things that we only have this.